Greetings everyone, I'm Uttam Kumar, Partner Development Manager at DataGaps. Welcome you to the second session under Data and Analytics Testing Automation track of Trusted Data Summit 2024. For this session today, I take immense pleasure to introduce our speaker Manish Bhatia. He is a service area lead for quality engineering at IBM and brings in a wealth of expertise in data testing and test data management practice across the industry. With his extensive experience, he has helped organizations optimize their data operations and ensure quality at every stage. Today, he will share with us his insights on data and visualization testing automation, their growing challenges and maturing solutions. During the session, I would request the attendees to please submit their question in the Q&A section near the top right corner of the window. In the interest of time, the speaker would take up question at the end of the session. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Manish to deliver his talk. Manish, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uttam, and thanks DataGaps for giving me this opportunity. Hello everyone, a very good afternoon, good evening, and a late night and early morning for all our Asia audience as well. My name is Manish Bhatia, and we'll be talking about data and visualization testing, automation basically. What we have seen is while people talk about the data platforms, growing volume, variety, velocity of the data, and the data quality becomes very important. What we have not seen is that why data quality deteriorates over a period of time, because the data keeps coming in, and while you are monitoring the data there, it becomes very challenging to ensure that the quality is intact. So what is important is that any data which is coming in new to your data platforms, be it data warehouses, your cloud systems and all, we do a thorough data testing, and with the kind of volumes we are seeing, it's not possible to do it manually, and hence the importance of data testing automation. So we would talk about the challenges and how the solutions are maturing from manual testing to automation, and what we bring in to the table with different kind of tooling and scripting there. So as part of today's session, I would be talking about why data testing is important, what our analysts talks about, the impact of the data quality, and how we ensure the data quality. And then we would move on to the industry challenges. What we are seeing is that traditional data testing, the way it was done manually with a smaller volume, you process your batches and then you just monitor the data and things like that. That is gone now because of the social media and cloud data, the third-party data coming into picture, all kind of formats coming in. It throws a different kind of challenges. We will talk about that. And where data testing, we call data quality engineering, that what kind of landscape and use cases we would, try to solution at. And then the next one we would talk about what are the solution levers we need to, as part of the data testing. While automation is one of the lever, what are the other things we could bring to the table to ensure that our data testing is adequate, efficient, and doesn't leave any defects in the production. And then I would talk about a case study of merger of two large banks, where how we have kind of helped them migrate their data from one entity to other, or merge the data and for that merged entity. We would also talk about GenAI, because without GenAI today, any kind of solution you bring in doesn't kind of become an impactful discussion. And obviously in each and every area we have seen how GenAI has kind of impacted. So there are certain GenAI solutions we would talk about how it would impact the data testing. And then lastly, as you all know, that DataGaps has a data BI testing automation solution. So we would talk about how it helps do the BI testing there. And lastly, as I said, we will leave last 10 minutes for Q&A for all your questions. So please use the chat button or Q&A button to put your questions, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. All right, so I think Uttam has given the introduction, so I'll leave this part and then move on to the next slide, where all the analysts like Forresters, Gartner talk about the data quality, but why data quality becomes poor in your data platforms, and the reason is inadequate data testing. If you have not done proper data testing while migrating the data, while modernizing your systems, or creating a data warehouse, over a period of time, the data quality deteriorates, and hence you would face all these challenges where it costs an organization on average 12.9 million, as Gartner says, or the CXOs feel that they're taking critical business decisions because they feel the data is data quality is good and they will be able to take those decisions, but underlying data is not. When you see the different I would say the departments of an organization see the data in different views and formats and dashboards, they find that those don't match. And because it is coming from two different sources and it is not reconciled properly, and that's where the problem starts, and it impacts your decisions which you are taking, and it could impact a lot. Moving on quickly, we will talk about the industry challenges here. So, as we know that traditionally the data testing was done manually, where you would kind of compare the data between source and target manually, stare and glare, or some people who have kind of matured their manual testing by using Excel macros, where you would bring in data from your source and target to an Excel sheet, write macros, and kind of try to compare it automatically. But then again, there are limitations to it. You could only do on a certain kind of volume, which is not adequate in today's world. With advent of social media, the big data coming in, the 4 V's of the big data: the volume, the variety, the velocity, and the veracity. And we will talk about these, that how millions and millions of records are now coming in. If you see a telecom company, the call records which are being generated, the banking transactions with UPI in India, you just see the number of transactions which have just gone up every second. With social media on WhatsApp, the blogs, your videos, everything, the messages which you are sending in, volume has just gone unprecedented, and that's where it throws a different kind of challenge. You just cannot do, even with automated testing, catering to this volume 100% is a big challenge. Then the variety of the data. Earlier we used to have the text, CSV, or an XML format, but today you see hundreds of different formats of the blogs and formats which are coming into picture, where you would have to convert those formats, the structured and unstructured data. While everything was earlier structured, now it is semi-structured or unstructured data, which you would have to convert into a structured format before you could even use it. Similarly, for testing of that data, you would have to convert that, and that could pose different challenges. Velocity, obviously the kind of streaming we have of these data which is coming in, you just don't have the window to test everything. By the time you are able to test a volume, a bigger volume comes in, and it throws a different kind of challenge. And veracity is basically data is too much, the third party data, social media data, and you cannot trust which data is trustworthy, which data to use, which data is and that's the biggest challenge today. You do a Google of a query, and it throws you so many options that you don't know which one to really trust on. So that's a different kind of challenge which we need to cater to. Obviously, there are certain outliers, as I said, the semi-structured and unstructured data, where you would have to convert it. And while converting, you may throw some defects there. So while you are creating something to test it, it may throw certain false positives for you, so you have to cater to that as well. Packages and mainframes, where you really don't have, the data testers don't have the knowledge of those packages, data testers don't have access to these databases and mainframes directly, and hence it becomes a challenge for data testers to do data testing on these packages and mainframes. Third party data, where you really have no control of the format or the quality of the data, and that again throws a different kind of challenges. From a process perspective, the mapping and the complex transformations which you have today, sometimes it's just not possible to even have a scripting or a tooling which would automatically create SQL for such complex transformation. So you would have to do it manually. So again, 100% of automating your scenarios in case of data sometimes is not possible, but it throws a different kind of challenge. In case of BI testing, where apart from the data, you would have to ensure that you check the UI and performance of the report. Historical data again throws a different kind of challenge. The ETL pipeline which you have created caters to your day-to-day incremental load. But if you have to load historical data, either you would have to create it separately, or you would have to ensure that your maps are created so that it caters to the historical data load as well. I will give you an example where while loading the historical data, it delayed the whole testing process as well. And finally, we would talk about the DevOps integration and end-to-end automation, because everything you do, if it is not part of your DevOps pipeline, it is not going to be a fully automated thing. So you would have to ensure that whatever solution you have is fully integrated with your DevOps pipeline, and it is end-to-end automation. Okay, I think my slide has come in here. Yeah, so moving on, now we have seen what are the challenges, in regards to data testing. Now, where all these challenges come into picture. So these are the 5 broad areas of the landscape where we see that a data testing automation comes into picture. First, obviously, is your data migration. We will call it quality engineering for data migration. So wherever you are upgrading a database, you are modernizing your legacy systems, or you are moving to the cloud, data testing automation comes into picture. Again, because if it is moving to cloud or you're modernizing, the large volume comes into picture. ETL, if you're creating a data warehouse or a MART or an MI system. Big data, obviously, you would have Hadoop, NoSQL, unstructured data, social media data. So you see the use case is different and the challenges are different. While you would deploy the data testing automation with a tooling or a scripting, but you see a different kind of landscape is there, and it possesses a different kind of challenge there. In case of BI reports, you have this new age visualization. So traditionally you had business objects, Cognos, MicroStrategy kind of reporting systems, but now with Tableau and Power BI coming in, and very strong kind of graphics and customized views, visualization which you have, that throws a different kind of challenge there, where the UI and format of testing of apart from the data comes into the picture, performance of those reports, also the role-based access of the report, that who should have access to that report, who should have access to what data comes into the picture, and finally all your MDM application, where in the merger and acquisition or a consolidation where you have the same master data having in different department and with different views. So you create a master hub, a single definition, a single source of truth, and where in those cases where you have those merge and match rules, data testing becomes very important to ensure that the single truth which you have created of your master data is accurate and doesn't have any kind of anomalies. All right, so we will come to the solution levers. So what is that we do to overcome these challenges and help us in implementing these data platforms with good data quality and be able to do the data testing automated? So obviously automation is one of the levers, but first we will talk about the shift left approach. What we are doing here is that while in your V model or waterfall model, testing comes a little later, sometimes you design the test, but the system test, the execution happens at the end. After the unit testing, developer has created the maps and unit testing is done. What we are recommending here is that you design your test scenarios and cases independently at the same time when the developers and designers have designed their transformations. The same scenarios and test cases could be given to the developers to run it on their developed code, so that we detect the defects early and we are able to reduce any design flaws and be able to change the design. I'll take an example where one of the UK customers, where for an insurance customer, where they were modernizing their legacy system, and we had used Informatica maps to kind of re-engineer and load their data into a data warehouse, but that entire Informatica map was created for the incremental load. We had not thought about that, how the historical data which needs to be loaded before the incremental load comes into picture. So the testing, we could not load this historical data using the same Informatica maps, and the 3 days which we had assigned for historical load, we could not complete in 10 days, and the entire schedule went for a toss. We had to rewrite some of the maps, Informatica maps, to ensure that we are able to load the historical data and then start the testing on the incremental load. So if this was done while developers had done unit testing, we could have avoided that. So this kind of approach, where we kind of able to take care of some of the design flaws at the start, really helps. Automation, I think, is one of the levers where the kind of volume we are seeing, streaming data coming in, the kind of variety of the data coming in, either a commercial automation tool or scripting like Python, Databricks, where you are able to cater to the 100% volume and are able to do it unattended, a faster execution which saves your effort. If you are doing manual testing or minus queries or even Excel and all that, what happens is if you are doing it manually, you would have to wait till you get the results of one query and then start. So the tester has to wait for that results to come out. Here, using the automation tool or scripting, what happens is that you can run it one after the other, unattended, schedule it, and it kind of captures any defects they find, and it can log in ALM tool automatically. Third one, we talk about the component test. Here what we are talking about is, while as you see the data moves in stages, there are layers. You have your source systems, databases, file systems, then it gets to your landing area, from landing to your ODS, operational data store, and then moves to data warehouse or mart, and then finally the visualizing tool. It becomes very difficult if we just test the target against the source and say that the values are not matching. It is not matching to the source. And where the issue is, which layer is creating that defect, we don't know. So hence what we see is that independently, once the design is ready with the testers, they will write their independent queries, or they'll use the automation tool and they run their test against each layer. So what happens is, first you isolate the defect and you are giving a root cause analysis to developers to fix it fast and efficient. Finally, end-to-end data QE, where we are talking about that we mimic what happens in UAT, what business users are going to test, because they test the KPIs. They don't test the technically what is happening to your transformation of the data. They want to see that what is there in this particular field which should come. And that's where you mimic those, you create the test cases on your target systems based on the KPIs, and that reduces your defects in UAT, improves the quality of the data. And just to talk about automation here, it's a typical landscape where you have your sources, then data moves to the landing area, staging area, finally to the core and semantic layer, and then you have MicroStrategy. So it's a Teradata database, MS SQL, Teradata used as a ETL as well, and MicroStrategy was a report. So I've just taken a typical example from a customer based in Canada where these were the layers. And as I said, you have the test point one right at the start when you're loading the source into your loading. Then from loading to stage, you'll have test point number 2, and then so and so forth. Then finally at the test point 6, once it is loaded into MicroStrategy, you can do those KPI tests, which is your end-to-end test, to ensure that it is adhering to the business rules, what business is looking as part of the UAT. Now, what we do as part of this automation, be it an automation tool or scripting, as I said, a cell-by-cell test, you ensure that each and every data point is tested. You do an end-to-end testing, 100% validation of any kind of high volume. It is unattended. It integrates with ALM. So the thing is, you have automated everything, but if you have to still take the screenshot, because the developers would want you to share the defects screenshot where the data is not matching with the source and all that. So what happens is, when you automate, you actually take those the defects automatically and then load it, update your ALM. It integrates with your CI/CD pipeline, where you really don't have to run it anything manually. Any defects you find, it schedules and emails and things like that. So these are the automation features you should have as part of your automation solution for any data testing. All right, so here comes the case study of that 2 banks which we kind of helped with the merger. So what happens is, in a large kind of banks, these were the 2 entities, entity A and entity B. Now the volume was very high. It was not like entity A is bigger than B, much bigger than B, where entire data of entity B has to go to and merge in entity A. These were the 2 large banks and similar applications, because obviously they are banks, so they will have all kind of transactions similar in nature. Now what happens is, while entity A was matured in certain type of applications, while entity B was matured in certain other type of applications. So a due study was to be done and decide that which application of entity A would take precedence and data from B would merge there, and there were certain applications where the application of that nature was kept from B and data from A was merged. And in certain cases, they decided that it's too complex to have any one entity kept and the other one, data to be merged. So they retired both A and B of that certain application and created a greenfield application C, I would say a new application, not keeping even A or B. So this is where the complexity comes into the picture. And then certain data, certain master data, they decided to load Big Bang in one shot. While certain data, because it was too large a volume, they decided to have an incremental load and run it parallel, reconcile it for certain days, and they cut over of the old application when they ensure that that data is synchronizing on a daily basis and they don't find any defects. So all these things kind of throws different kind of challenges, and you would see here that the 29 million accounts of both entities, it's just not possible manually, or even with an efficient automation, it is very difficult unless you run it parallelly. Your 450 batches, 3,300 APIs to be tested, and bigger challenge, the test environment. You would not have a test environment to scale to have the high volume of the merged data, while there were test environments which could handle entity A or B, but then there was not a big enough environment to kind of take care of that kind of merged data. And then it was very important to know that what kind of data you would test. Then obviously the formats, again, there were variety of the formats. You had to convert those formats before you do the testing, but then again they could throw in certain false positives. So you had to be very, we created those utilities to convert. At the same time, we ensured that those utilities which were created were tested and not throwing any kind of false positives. We also had to create some mock data for those rewritten application because we didn't have any data coming in from A and B. At that point of time, we were creating it a new application for that, and till the development completes and some data comes in, we had to really create a synthetic data for that. From a velocity perspective, historical data load 170 million to be tested and loaded in a very short span of time. As I said, the master data, we had very small window because we were doing a Big Bang migration there. And then for a parallel processing also, till the cutover happens, we had to run on a daily basis the synchronization, reconciliation of those two systems. So we had created automated scripts to do that, and if there were any defects coming in, we had to fix it and again do the rerunning there. Obviously, apart from these, there are other challenges. Third-party integrations like Visa Network, they had to create kind of 5 million debit cards in a weekend, and that had to be tested and ensured that everything goes smoothly. There were Hive tables. As you know, Hive doesn't support minus queries, so we had to kind of find a way of to ensure that whatever data was there in Hive is converted in another format so that we could kind of have our queries executed there. And then moving data, again there was a regulation that you cannot just move data from one entity to another in their test environment. So we really had to create a framework where we kind of mock that data or at least mask the sensitive elements and then move that data so that we are able to test that in a merged entity. Moving on, what we did. Obviously, we created a data testing automation framework which kind of catered to the 100% coverage of the data. We did it using Python. And what happened was that earlier, as I said, the minus queries or Excel-based macros, or you do a manual testing where you kind of, stare, glare, and pair, find that, okay, for this customer, what is the balance here, what is the balance there, and all that, which is not adequate in this kind of merger scenario. So this Python where, we kind of created automated SQL and run those jobs unattended one by one, and scheduled it so that we kind of get all the defects very fast and be able to update the LM automatically as well. The file conversion and validation utilities were created for those file systems, as I said, because again the formats were so vivid that we had to create these utilities and we had to test them. Otherwise, they could kind of create false positives. Then obviously with all this also the window was very less, so we had to have a parallel processing. Wherever we didn't have the dependency, we ran those jobs parallel. From a test data perspective, we created a synthetic data creation utility for all rewritten applications. We created a framework where we were able to mask the data and transmit the data from old to new and new to old. As I said, the applications were decided in a way that some of the data was merged from entity A to B and some of the data was B to A. So we were able to mask the data and load it into respective environments to test it. And finally, we had certain governance and processes where we created those test metrics and kind of, so that we consistently follow those processes to ensure that when we move from different environments, it caters to and follows the process. Just to give you a view of what all accelerators we created, it's a list of things and which kind of, given the value to the customer, there were test case generators which were created automatically from the mapping document. What happens is all your data testers takes the data mapping document, creates the SQL, creates the test case, all that was done automatically. There was an automated reports comparison utility created between legacy Cognos and the converted BI reports, because when they merged, they kind of moved from the legacy Cognos to a new SBI reports. So we created a comparison utility to ensure that the data which is there in both the reports reconcile. There were certain things, kind of test data simulator, as I spoke about. There was a daily test execution report automation where it used to give and share with the customers on SharePoint that how much testing is done and how many defects were kind of created and things like that. JSON XML file converter, as I said, that we created those utilities to convert files so that we could then bring them to a format where we would able to test that. So these are certain kind of accelerators we created, which kind of helped these banks have a smooth merger. And then I'll come to the GenAI solutions. Obviously, while we do automation using the traditional Python scripting or certain commercial tools, there are limitations there. What we are seeing is that this transformation rule document, we find that this it is there in a day-to-day life of a data tester. The first job is or the test designer that we get this business rule transformation document, which is given to the design and development team to also create the transformation rules or their ETL transformation. Same is given to the testing team. Now, this particular document is not in a particular format. So what happens is, even if you have written something, you would want a customer to change or convert all their business mapping document into a particular format, and then only you will be able to process that. With help of GenAI, we can automate the processing of this document. It is format independent, where it can read all kind of, if you kind of give a prompts, a learning that it could read what all different kind of formats and then gets be able to understand based on the headings of this business rule document. You can process it automatically, and once you're able to process it automatically, you are able to create the test cases and SQL as well automatically on that. So what happens is that using the GenAI, it becomes a customized SQL for a specific DBs. While you kind of use a Python or let's say a particular tool, and then let's say these days in organizations, as we have seen, that they have multiple databases as well. Some places it would have Oracle, some places MS SQL. So all the databases have a slightly different SQL syntax, I would say. So what happens is that whatever code your automated script or a tool would be able to write, it is not a DB independent. With help of GenAI, it would be able to convert all your test cases and SQL, which is generated automatically, uh, you know, uh, without a specific DB. As far as it is, you are able to give that input that it should be able to generate for a particular DB. It would generate and it would convert those SQL in that particular format, and that's where GenAI really helps automating this SQL generation. And then third one is scheduling and execution. The whatever we spoke about, that merger and acquisition, that was long back. Gen AI had not come into picture while there was a little bit of AI. But today you don't have to write any utility and all that. There are things available using Llama modules. You'll be able to convert any kind of file format into anything, and these are tested. Obviously, with AI, you would have to ensure that your prompts understands your requirements and be able to do it. But then with Gen AI, with the data you feed in and models maturing as we go, it has become a routine job and helps the data tester on their day-to-day work. The automated scheduling, in fact, finding if there is any dependency, it has to wait for another job to run completely and then run the next one. If it has to generate those logs for that, notifies email, all that could be done, with Gen AI, taking, your automation to the next level. Defect logging, monitoring, everything could be done there as well. So just want to emphasize that while Gen AI is there, we can kind of leverage it to ensure that whatever degree of automation we have achieved, we take it to the next level and utilize Gen AI in our solutions. Moving on, and then I'll talk about the yeah. So I'll talk about the data gaps. So there are, as I said, I gave an example of how we have automated data testing using Python. At the same time, I gave you a view of the features which should be there as part of your, the automation journey or automation framework. And here we talk about the data gaps, how you do an end-to-end data testing automation using data gaps. So data gaps is a leading data testing automation tool apart from other things it does. And what you see here is that they kind of leverage the Gen AI, where the data quality monitor creates a data quality scoring, the data quality of your source data, be it on-prem storage or cloud, or any kind of database tables, flat files, XML, JSON, or even your APIs or a visualization tool like Tableau or Power BI. Any kind of source systems, it would be able to create a scoring of the data quality. So before even you process, you need to ensure and score the quality of the data, so that even before processing, data is of highest quality. You kind of, create those, the machine learning, where it kind of, finds the pattern, and if there are any anomalies in the data, you kind of fix it before you even process as part of your ETL. And once it is there in your landing zone, you do your ETL validation. Using Gen AI, it is able to validate your transformation rules, and then it gets loaded into your curated zone. Finally, it again goes back to your warehouse and data mart for further processing into your dashboards and reports. Again, as I said, the dashboards and reports throws a different kind of challenge. It's not just the data testing you ensure. The biggest challenge what we see here is that the business users, when they have to take a decision, they see different data when there are different dashboards, same data shown in different views, and it throws a different kind of data. It's not in sync because you have refreshed certain tables at a certain frequency and some data is not refreshed yet, and things like that. So synchronizing your dashboards is very important, and ensuring that the data is in sync with the source everywhere. They're synced with each other, and that's where Gen AI comes into picture. Especially your UI and formats of your dashboards comes into picture. Performance of these reports are very important. Role-based access, who should have access of which report, who should have access to which data in that report, all that comes into the picture. And hence, it becomes very important. So with this one, I think I am at the hour where I'll finish by saying thank you very much for listening to me. If there are any questions, I can take it up. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Manish, there are a couple of questions that we will take. So we'll start with the first question, and the question is, what are the primary skills required for a data tester?
Good question. Thank you. So what we have seen is traditionally anybody having SQL, the basic SQL, where you are able to do a select on different source and target databases, or you are able to kind of go and check in the file systems on Unix. You're able to do it. So basic Unix and SQL is what the skills were required earlier. But now what you are seeing is when you test, the kind of ETL you're using, it depends on that as well. So you need to have a basic knowledge of ETL, because you would have to run the jobs to ensure that when you are testing, you are able to refresh the data. Python, as I said, because you have to automate, you cannot do it manually. You would have to automate it. So Python becomes very important. And with more and more legacy modernization and data moving to the cloud, the basic cloud understanding and exposure is also important. So SQL, ETL, Python, and cloud is what I would say the primary area of skills. Obviously, the SQL is the first and foremost, and the more advanced SQL, I would say, with transformation complexity.
Okay. Yeah, the next question is, how do you ensure sensitive data is not unintentionally exposed in an AI outputs?
Can you come again?
How do you ensure sensitive data is not unintentionally exposed to a AI output?
Yeah, so that's where the test data management comes into picture. So any output or any data, before you kind of open it up for testing or training or for any purposes, you need to profile the data to find out if there are any sensitive elements there. And if that any kind of elements are sensitive, if you find it while profiling it, you would have to mask it, and you have to mask it in such a way that it is irreversible masking, it is consistent masking, it is on the fly masking, so that nobody can reverse engineer and find out. So that kind of masking you do, and then you load it into any environment which is consumed by your testers or trainers.
Okay. Now the next question is, usually data testing is done on sample records which may leak defects. Is 100% volume coverage is possible with automation?
Yes, absolutely. With thanks to tools like DataGaps and various commercial tools, with Python, with engine like Databricks, you can get 100% of the volume covered. While you may not be able to cover 100% scenarios automatically, as I said, there are very complex transformations. Sometimes you have like 5 tables, and you have to merge the data and a very complex logic which goes into tens of columns in an Excel sheet. So obviously that would not be automated generation of SQL. So the generation of SQL might be manual for that, but you can feed that into these tools, and again the remaining process would be automated, where once it is fed in, it would be part of your pipeline, and you can test 100% of your volume.
Okay. Yeah, we are also having some more questions. So the next question is, how do you identify and mitigate biases in your data?
Right. So as I said, especially the third-party data coming in, where you would not know. So the biggest advantage you have is that the same business rule mapping document is given to you, and that's where that end-to-end testing comes into picture, where users gives you the requirement that what should be there in my target system, that it should adhere to. While there might be problems with the source data, where the data itself is coming with some bias, but it cannot be consumed by your end users if you have tested and ensured that it should adhere to the requirements which are given to you as part of creating the system. So if I have to take an example, or there are certain logical things that if I would take a gender, so you would have only 3 values, and a male, female, and others. Let's say if that is the requirement, that you could have only these 3 values, so you would ensure that if the data in the source itself is corrupt, it doesn't get loaded and it goes as a failure. Another requirement where if it is saying that let's say you are creating invoices, but then invoice cannot be of a value 0 for certain reasons. And in fact, we realized for a customer that they were sending some samples to certain customers, and where the invoice value was 0, But then again, what happens is it skews. In a given particular day, if you send all the samples, the price of that product on that given day reduces a lot, and that creates an anomaly there in the systems. So these are the biases. So you need to ensure that you have the mechanism to test these and they don't get consumed. While they get processed, sometimes they don't get consumed by your
Okay.
consumption later and they are excluded.
Okay. So I'll take one last question and then we wrap up. So the question is, how do we test performance aspects of data applications?
Right. So both ETL and reports needs to, as gave an example of an Informatica map for a particular customer where we were not able to load the historical data using the same Informatica maps because performance testing was done. So you use LoadRunner or any kind of performance tools where you kind of load all the data. Even if that data is not there, those tools are capable of creating a mock volume for it to really find out whether it is able to handle that kind of load or not. So you run those performance tests using these tools on data, and at the same time reports as well, because reports concurrent users, how many users it can handle at a given point of time. When you kind of slice and dice how much time it is taking. So using the performance tools, obviously both ETL and reports you kind of test. And there are certain manual things as well which you test where you compare. Let's say you had a Cognos report where it was taking so and so time to refresh. How much time it is taking now with the new reports and things like that. So there are certain manual interventions you do, and most of it is automated using performance tools.
Right. So with that, we thank Manish for answering all the questions, delivering valuable insights on data and visualization testing automation, and helping us better understand its challenges and opportunities. Thank you everyone for joining the session. We hope you found this session insightful and engaging. Stay tuned with us for our upcoming session today in TDS. Check the agenda page for session details and explore what's next. See you there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Uttam, as well.